Okay, this is going to be the follow-on to the last three videos I made um, concerning GPS. The last three videos were about was me showing how they claim it works, how it wouldn't even work even if we did live on a globe, how it doesn't work that way and it can't work that way, especially on a globe. It could somewhat work on a flat plane, but that way will never work on a globe, never. Um, not that I would be saying we live on a globe. Obviously, I wouldn't. But I'm just saying that even if we did, hypothetically, then it couldn't work that way, as I show and prove. This what I'm going to show now is how it actually works. Okay, because even what I showed in my last video, I think the video was before that as well, about how probably all three. Sorry, not my last one, but the last three videos about how it could actually, how they say it works, it could actually work that way on a flat plane. But that would require, basically, we'd have to pre-assume there was some form of satellites, which there may be. There's definitely balloon satellites, and there's definitely airplanes that have their own coordinates, coordinates of their sub point coordinates, I should say, a point on the ground, GP coordinates, things like that. So it is possible that we could use those things, and I'm sure airplanes are definitely using balloon satellites. And airplanes have GPS receivers on their top and their bottom, so on their base and their top. So they're definitely getting receiving. The bit is they can also be receiving information from other planes that are at higher altitudes as well. The borders don't think these things out. Like everything is satellites in an orbit around the globe. But they have no understanding of reality. They're a very lost group of people, the people we deal with. But either way, I mean, it is who we have to deal with. But airplanes obviously could be receiving GPS from other airplanes that are flying at higher altitudes, and that's a big part of the purpose of them having. And I'm pretty sure they do receive signals from other aircraft. I can't remember if they definitely do, but I'm pretty sure they do, because I can't remember all that information right now. Because it was last year I was looking at it, and the year before. Either way, they would be receiving information from balloons and from anything, right? Anything that's above them. But they also receive information from the ground, right? And a lot of the ballers didn't even know that until I told them. And I'm sure some other flat earthers told them as well. They just don't listen, those people. So I can't say I'm the only person, but I'm sure someone else told them. But I know I definitely told them. That is for definite. And I reckon most of them didn't hear it before anyway, but before I said it, either way. Anyway, let's move off of the borders, right, and what they want reality to be. And it's not our fault that reality is not what they want it to be. That's nothing to do with us. This is how GPS actually works, right? So what we have here, I have a circle that is depicting compass rose. Now I don't have all the degrees on it, right? I could have put them in. I could have put an actual compass rose in, but I wanted it to be the screen to be more clear, so it was more clear what you're seeing me doing. But it's going to be pretty simple. Here's north here, this red. Then at the bottom, south. Over here is east, and over here is west. So north, south, east, west. Okay, and it's going to be north 360 degrees around, right? That's your compass rose. Here is the receiver, right? I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. Make this a bit bigger, right? The receiver. And now I'll keep it blue, right? So here is your receiver, right? Here is signal source 1, signal source 2, signal source 3, signal source 4, and signal source 5. So let's just say the receiver is on a cold start. It's been turned off. This has been what I've said from the start in my past three videos. It's on a cold start, and you turned it off a week ago in one country, and you turned it back on in a completely different country or different place, right? So the receiver is receiving 5 signals from 5 different locations, right? it doesn't know, it's getting from each one of these, it's getting the time the signal was sent, so it knows the time it receives it. It received it. That tells it that if this signal, see, something else the ballers don't understand. Right? I'm sorry, I have to mention them because I have no choice, right? Sometimes, right? They don't understand this. Part of the reason why a GPS receiver receives the timing is because it needs to know at what exact time that signal source was over or at that coordinates. So if you take this to be a plane or a boat, ship, right? Because this could be a receiver on a boat and that's a ship, right? You're receiving information from. If right, or you could be on land and near the coast and receiving information from a ship, right? Because it doesn't matter. Whatever this signal source is, if it's a moving source, because they're not always moving source, sometimes the signal source is stationary, right? Something else the ballers don't. I won't even go into it now. I guarantee you they'll all be in the comments not being able to take that. They won't be able to take that they're stationary signal sources, for GPS. They won't be able to deal with that. That'll cause them an aneurysm. But either way, the whole point of this is that you get a timing for when, and even if that is, let's just say you get a time for when the signal was broadcast out, and the time the receiver receives it, right? Even if the receiver is moving and this is stationary, the receiver needs to know when it got the signal, let's just say, right? But more important is for if the signal source, any of these sources, let's say, is moving the signal, right? The receiver needs to know, right, when it was over that exact coordinates, right? So it has 5 signals from 5 different sources, regardless of what they are. I don't care what they are, right? Call them what you want, right? And with these signal sources, it gets coordinates. So it gets this coordinates of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But the receiver, right, doesn't know, right, where these coordinates are, right? It might be able to determine, right? It might be able to determine a distance via timing, right? If it was to use the two-way speed light calculation, it could try and determine a distance to the source. Let's say it's an airplane or a balloon, high altitude balloon. It could be able to determine that, but that then means that it has to start using triangles then, because that's going to be a hypotenuse. So it's going to need to then figure it can then use a triangle and say, okay, if that's the hypotenuse and it knows the angle, because I've shown that receivers, GPS receivers have compasses, they know compass bearings, they know azimuth, and they know angles. So go, okay, there's an angle to an airplane or a balloon, right? And the angle is 60 degrees, and it knows that means, right, if it uses right underneath that at that exact time, there was a 90 degrees angle at the sub point, the GP, let's say the coordinates on straight underneath the airplane or balloon. So then it knows that there's a 30 degree angle up here. So then it has one side length and 3 angles, and it can calculate its distance to that, right, to that point there, right? A bit of trigonometry, you can do it, right? But now it can do that. I'm not going to say it can't do that, right? But there's a simpler way for it to happen, okay? So let's just say it gets a signal here, right? This is signal source 2. It gets, and it knows that it's at, let's just say it's at, signal source 2 is at, let's say, northeast, right, of the receiver. So, 1 second now, let's get a segment. So, it's at northeast of the receiver, right, at a particular angle, right, from its position, right, azimuth angle. So, what it does is it creates a ghost, right, the other direction. So, that's out, right, place the ghost the other direction. I'm just going to place it in the right place. The receiver wouldn't know. Let me see, over 6. I think that's right. Doesn't over. Oversight. 1 second. I'm trying to do this live. Right, that's right. Okay. Oh, that's wrong again. Sorry, I'm just trying to do this live. So trying to make it so it's straight. I have this wrong. It's on 6. Oh, sorry. I never have 6 and 5. Right, so 6 over and 5 up. There we go. So I'm just going to color this a little bit different. I'm going to make this one orange. I'm going to make it like that, right? So from the signal source here, right, it knows the angle, right, the azimuth angle, but it doesn't know how far away it is from the source, right? So the easiest way for it to find where it is, right, for the receiver to find where it is in relation to the signal source, is to make a ghost, right, the opposite way. So if this is northeast, let's just say it's directly, it may not be exactly northeast, but if that's directly northeast, then this is going to be directly southwest. Now it doesn't know where, it doesn't know how long this line is, this whole line here, but it knows it's somewhere on this line, right? It knows it's somewhere on this line because it can determine by the azimuths that it is on that line. So let's say it uses signal source 4 then, right? And that is, right, south-southeast, right? So it needs to go north-northwest with that one. So we get another segment, right, here, and that's 2 up to 6. Right. Now the receiver is not going to know that information straight away, what I'm saying there, but just so I'll make that orange and make that serrated, right? So now it has two ghost signals, right, and 2 ghost azimuths, let's call it, right? It has signal source 2 and signal source 4. And it has the coordinates of 2 and the coordinates of 4, just like it has the coordinates of all of them. But now it's after, right, now it's after making a crossing line. So you have 2 crossing lines now. So it knew it was somewhere along this line, right? It knows the coordinates of both of them, and now it has this one crossing that line. So straight away it's starting to find its own position because the 2 lines are crossing. It's now starting to know that it is this distance here from that signal source. It didn't know that it was that distance before, but it does now. And how it knows is because it knows, right, between these 2 coordinates, how is it going to know where it is on that line? Because it has 2 azimuths, right, with crossing lines. And it knows that it's starting to find out at this point, right, that because of these 2 lines crossing there, that starting to tell it where it is. Now, it might also, right, bring in another signal source. Let's say it brings in signal source 1, right, and it does the same with that, and that's directly north. So signal source 1, right, it creates another ghost, right, ghost azimuth or ghost line, whatever you want to call it, right. So it has 3 ghost lines, right? That's 3 crossing lines immediately, right? And it brings in another line. Let's say it brings in signal source 3. So signal source 3 is 7 over and up 5. I'm just going to put it in there right, even though I'm putting it in there right, but I know that the GPS receiver wouldn't know that at the time, right? It's trying to find out. So a second now, let's make it orange and make it serrated, right? So now it has 4 signals and 4 ghost lines, right? And it has 5 coordinates, but of these 4 ghost lines, it has four coordinates, right? So it now knows it actually has 8 coordinates. And what I mean by that is, it didn't know originally how far it was from signal source 2, right? So, but all it could do was create a crossing line or create a line in the opposite azimuth, right? Then it brought in signal source 3, or signal source 4, sorry, and then it did the same with that. And because it knows the coordinates of both of them and it knows the distances between both of them, right? It knows where this one here, based on the azimuths, where that one is crossing that one, right? And it's after doing the same with 2 more, right? So what the receiver needs to find out now is it's finding out already exactly where it is, because it originally found out how far away it was from this one, which put it in a place on this line, and then it found out how far away it was from this one, signal source 2, and right, so it knew on this line. So, but it also has these, because these are actual coordinates as well. So whatever distance the receiver is from signal source 2, it has the coordinates in the opposite direction, right, in the ghost of signal source 2, right? So it can use them, right? So what I mean by that is it can now use something like even signal source 5, something that hasn't even used as a crossing line with yet, and it can connect up this A, which is the ghost of signal source 2, right, with signal source 5, right, and it can start figuring out based off, because it has this length here, and it now knows this distance here because it knows where this is in relation to this and this. So it can now start using the likes of signal source 5 and start using things like triangles, right? Right. It has the angle to that, and between this and this, right? And it has this length and this length, right? And it knows the differences in distance between these two, and so it knows the angles here, and that, you know, straight away starts telling it where it is. But it can make it even easier on itself, right? If it doesn't want to complicate things, right? I'll just take, right, just take away that initial line there. What it can also do is it has signal source 1 here, and it has G here, right, which is the ghost of signal source 4. So, right, what it can do is it can say, right, that it can say it knows where G is, and it knows the distance to signal source 1. So to really get down its location, if it doesn't already have it, it can it can use the same length that G is, or the same point that G is that will be crossing on signal source 1. It can use that point and create an angle out of that, a right angle out of that. So now it has an angle and a right angle and another angle and 2 side lengths. And it knows where this one is as a coordinates, because it found out where this coordinates was, and that's the ghost of that. And it now can use that to find out exactly where it is, its distance from this exact point, and it knows the distance from here to here. And if it doesn't know exactly it can do another angle from there to there. Right? That's how it does it. Right? It can also use circles, but angles are going to be probably more used. But it can use circles as well. It can use circles also, as I showed in my presentation last year, where it can use circles there are crossing circles. So when they show circles, it's very likely they are using circles as well, but they are using angles like this, just trigonometry, two-dimensional trigonometry, basically. That's what they're using, right? So just take them away for the moment. Now, right, it has all these distances now, and it has basically its own location, right? Now, that's in a 2D, so it's going to get it it's going to be getting it in X and Y, right? Because it's mostly most of the coordinates will be in 2 dimension. So you get X and Y, or latitude and longitude. But because the receiver, right, which is what a lot of people don't realize, the bowlers don't realize that GPS receivers have inbuilt maps, right? And those inbuilt maps, right, are all the maps from surveying over the generations, right? So all the ordnance survey maps the receiver has, or at least has access to, right? So it knows when it finds its location in 2 dimensions, because it knows where it is on the map, and because that map is an ordnance survey map, it knows at what elevation it is if it's at that point. So if it's outside my door at my latitude and longitude, it knows, right, because it's at that exact latitude, longitude, or X and Y, it knows then at its elevation above mean sea level, because that's a known thing. You know what I mean? It knows because that's already part of the 3-dimensional ordnance survey maps, right, where they take in elevation, right? So it finds its location in 2 dimensions, and then it can tell the person who's holding the receiver their altitude, right? If it needs to, because the altitude will be part of the mapping. Like, do you know what I mean? Because once it finds it's two-dimensional, once it has access to the mapping, which they do, then at that point, they do have access to the mapping. Otherwise, they wouldn't know what coordinates that is. They wouldn't know where any coordinates is. There's no point giving it coordinates if it doesn't have mapping in it. The borders are crazy. Like, they literally deny that. Do you know what I mean? No, it doesn't have any mapping. It's like, it does. It's all the Ordnance Survey mapping. That's where it came from. It didn't come from the US Army or the US military. It didn't come from there. It came from surveying originally. That's where it started with. GPS started in surveying. That's why when I originally did presentations on it some years ago, I called it the Geographic Position System or something, or the Geodetic Positioning System. Not the Global Positioning System, as it eventually became known as, fraudulently. But the point is that if it didn't have mapping or access to mapping, how the hell is it going to know where any of these coordinates are? How is it going to know anything? It won't know anything. Within their paradigm, right? Let's just work off of what GPS does. I don't care if they want to claim satellites, whatever. Let's just say satellites. Let's say this is Signal 5 is satellite. It sends out information constantly, right? It's constantly sending out information. It's not taking in any information from receivers. It might be taking it in from updates in other ways, but it's not taking in information from receivers. So it sends out information, right, only, and the receiver receives information only. So then the receiver must find its own location based off of the information it gets from this satellite and whatever other satellites or sources it can get, whether it be land-based sources, whether it be a plane, a balloon, a ship, it doesn't matter. A car, a truck, anything you can get the information from, it'll take it. Now, at one time there wasn't all those sources because there wasn't GPS receivers and so many things, but now there is. But that doesn't mean, and at the time, that's why GPS was a lot less, over the years, it became more precise, because there's more sources of information. Do you know what I mean? It's like if going on Google and there's 3 sources of information, let's say 20 years ago on something. Now you go on it and there could be 50, 100, 3,000, whatever, sources of information on something. So there's more information, right? It's the same thing for a receiver, right? It has more information there and more access to information and to signal sources that are pumping out signals constantly, right? Because let's say if signal source 1 is a plane and it's flying, then it's pumping out constantly its coordinates, right? Receiver picks it up and it knows at this exact time that plane or whatever it was, doesn't matter to the receiver what it was, just at that point, at that exact time, it picked up that was the coordinates of that signal source. That's all it needs, right? It has all the mapping inside of it once it starts getting a grip on where it is, and then it gets its two-dimensional coordinates, and then it knows then from the mapping what its elevation is going to be. That's how it does it. So it's not getting any magic from globe satellites. This is not happening. There's no magic happening because our opposition think that it's just getting 5 signals here and from 5 random places in the sky, and that's it. It's like, no, it needs to have land-based coordinates to work off of. Otherwise, it can't differentiate where it is. It also needs to have mapping in it, so it can determine, so the coordinates will mean something to it. Because it's like, there's no point in giving coordinates. It's like to a receiver, it doesn't have any mapping in it, or access to mapping. What can it do? It means nothing to it. It's like, you may as well be giving the coordinates to a dog. It doesn't mean anything. Do you know what I mean? The dog, what are you telling me? Like, is the dog's attitude, I can't do anything with that information. Do you know what I mean? This is the thing. So it has to know, it has to have mapping, right? The receiver has to have the mapping in it, so it knows what these coordinates are. Number one, it has to be able to deal with angles, so it knows at what angle it's getting something at. If it does need to use a triangle in that way, right? But the main thing it needs is the azimuth, right? So most importantly, it's the mapping and the azimuth, because that's what it needs most importantly. So mapping, azimuth, position, and the coordinates of that. Now, if it's going to take in, if it can, it'll take in the angles to do the airplane or whatever. Yeah, that's fine, right? If it needs to use that, because I'm sure it will use every process it can, right, in a short space of time. And it does take, I think it's like, is it like a minute or 2 minutes sometimes for a receiver on a cold start? I can't remember exactly what it was in the presentation. I had it in the presentation. I think it was like from 30 seconds to 2 minutes on a cold start for it to find its location. That means it's doing calculations. Do you know what I mean? If it's just getting information off satellites instantly at the two-way speed of light calculation, which is 671 million miles per hour, then it will have it instantly. It doesn't. A receiver on a cold start takes 30 seconds to about 2 minutes to find its location. Once it can get signals, right? Because obviously there's places it can't, I'm sure. Right? Jungles, it can't get it, right? Once it can get signals, if it can do something with that then. But this is the thing, on a cold start, it's not going to have an instant answer for you. It'll take a little bit of time. So it's doing calculations. Do you know what I mean? That's what it's doing. It's doing mathematics, trying to find out where it is, based off of the information it's getting. So this is how GPS works. It's actually that simple. Now, does it prove flat or globe? Right? Well, this is the thing, right? It doesn't prove flat or globe instantly, right? What I would say though is this, right? Azimuth is a flat plane, right? Angles is going to have to use a flat plane for them. Its coordinates, even though it's using the Universal Transverse Mercator map, which is a projection of a globe that came from flat Earth elevation angles to Polaris originally, right, which is the hijacking of the latitude and longitude grid that created our globe, back engineering of that to create their globe. It is using the Universal Transverse Mercator map, but that is also a grid map, right, which means it's originally, like it's a two-dimensional grid map. So it's using a flat plane map. Grid maps are flat planes. You can't see this grid map here, this gridding here. Can't put that on a globe because that will all distort. You can't. All these squares won't be equal in dimensions to each other. They're going to start distorting, so it doesn't work. It's like a disco ball. It's a mess. Do you know what I mean? So you can't have that. But what I would like people to take away from this is this. What it proves is that what they're telling you about how GPS actually works, right, it doesn't work that way, right? It also proves that if they have to use angles, then they need the Earth to be a flat plane to use them, right? And if they're going to be using triangles, because you have to remember they have to use triangles, right? Not just angles, let's say, in the azimuth. So they might be using triangles, let's just say, so they might even be doing something like this as well. They may not be using, and then they might do something like that and do it, and they calculate things in that kind of way and find out where it is. But that's going to be in the azimuth. So they're not going to be able to do that on a globe. Now, they have to the receiver has to pre-assume a flat plane or an Earth with a horizontal baseline. But the receiver pre-assumes a flat plane because it needs to use 2 dimensions. So it can't, because it has to find its position in 2 dimensions. It can't find this position in 2 dimensions on the surface of a globe, which is a 3-dimensional shape. Can't do that. And if it has to use angles, which it does, to signal sources and using azimuths, that's the horizontal coordinate system. So the azimuth is from here, it could be around to 60, whatever it is over here, right? 60 degrees over and an angle up 44 degrees or some nonsense like that, right? So then that can't work on a globe, right? And how does the receiver find these locations here? The receiver must pre-assume a flat plane to do all this. Now, that doesn't mean it can't be mathematically placed back onto a globe. But these angles that it's getting and the subpoints, coordinates, that it's going to get an azimuth and an elevation angle to, right, that requires a flat plane. And even if it just uses pure 2 dimensions, right, like it's used here, let's just say, that requires a flat plane too. So all these things require a flat plane. Could you place this mathematically on a globe after you've found yeah, you could. Crossing curved lines, yeah, you could do that. But the problem with the crossing curved lines is to do that. It could possibly work, right? If you had crossing curved lines, so let's just say it doesn't know how far away it is from signal source 2, and it makes a ghost line back this way, and then it does the same with signal source 4 and where the lines cross. It could start trying to work itself out somewhat, or work out somewhat where it is from that. But would that work on a globe? Remember the hassles there? Like they would have to, the receiver would have to have a way of being able to determine exactly, how far it is from this point and this point, which means it would have to then cut through as chord lines and different things like that. Maybe it could work mathematically. I'd say if I looked into it, I could probably make it work somewhat mathematically. But the point is that would be something we would have to do after the fact. What would be the point in trying to do that? Like, if it's going to do it, it'd have to do it after the fact, which means it can only offer the globe mathematics, whereas it can use a flat plane in reality and do all the things it needs to do in reality on a flat plane. It's using azimuth and elevation, right? Mostly azimuth, but it might need to use elevation sometimes too. It might use it, right? It might do that. But just because, so how is it going to do that on a globe? It won't be able. I didn't really think too much about it, but if I looked into it, I might make another video showing whether it will or wouldn't, whether it would or wouldn't work, or does or doesn't work over a spherical surface. But I know that to get two-dimensional coordinates, you need a flat plane to begin with, and it's all working off a grid system anyway. Because what they do as well is there's such a thing as, I know this sounds so stupid, but local vertical and local horizontal. What that is your position, your zenith is your vertical, and then your horizontal is what you're standing on, right? Or the mean sea level underneath you, right? That's local vertical, local horizontal. What they did was, the receiver sometimes, because I remember having this in the presentation, it'll be dealing with local verticals and local horizontals. They deal with them all the time in surveying, but it converts these to the Universal Transverse Mercator map, which is still a grid map, right? Still a grid map, but it's a cylinder map based around a globe. But the point I'm making is your local vertical, what they're calling a local vertical and local horizontal, which is an oxymoron thing to say, right? The point is that they, right, will then be converted to Universal Transverse Mercator to fit the globe. So everything they're doing, every single thing they do, they're trying to mathematically fit it back on a globe. Whereas every time they have to do anything in practical reality, they need to use the flat plane. And I don't see how this works and on anything but a flat plane. Why would you even come up with that if you're living on a globe? I'm not saying you wouldn't, but it doesn't make any sense. The way they say GPS works, it can't work that way, because, as I showed all the reasons in the past 3 videos and in my presentation last year, it can't work like that. It can only work like that on a flat plane. It definitely can't work that way on a globe. So it would mean that we'd have to have satellites over a flat plane. That's what it would have to mean if you want to add in satellites, because it can't work over a globe. It can't work on a globe. I'll give all the reasons it can't work. The receiver can't find its coordinates on a globe with that system. It might be able to find them on a globe or place them onto a globe afterwards with this system, possibly, right? But everything here points towards a flat plane. But the main thing is that if you think of it this way, I'm going to give this a bit more thought, and I might make another video on the subject if I feel there's a need to. The main thing is, they told us for years and years and years that GPS was a globe thing, when it's not. I can show evidence that GPS, only in the way they say it works, would only work on a flat plane. And with this system, in the way that it, right, as far as I'm concerned, the actual way it works, then this could be placed onto a globe mathematically after the fact. That's the best they got. So they need a flat plane at all times to do anything. Because when it comes to practical reality, what do we use? We use we pre-assume an Earth that's either a two-dimensional flat plane or an Earth with a horizontal baseline, with elevations that are above and below that. But for GPS, it's presuming a two-dimensional flat plane Earth. That's what it does, because that's how it finds its coordinates. Because the X, Y, or the latitude, longitude, it needs to find that first. Then it can deal with elevations. But the main thing is the X, Y, and latitude and longitude. So this is how it works, right? You can bring it to anyone. This is how it works. Because the way they say it works, it can't work that way. Unless they admit the Earth is flat, then it has some hope of working that way. Other than that, this is how it actually works. Because this is the only way, the absolute only way it can actually be correctly converted to a globe. Right? But it still requires a flat Earth to do it, no matter what way you twist or turn it. So I don't know where the border is going to go with this. They don't have anywhere to go as far as I'm concerned. It's a total loss for them. Total loss. I mean a massive defeat we've just had over them. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions on the matter, as opposed to telling me I'm wrong or abusing me or any of the rest of it, and I'm interested in that. If flat earthers have any real questions, or even ballers have any actual questions, not nonsense, then put them into the comments, right? And I will answer, right? In case there's something I left out here or whatever, in case there's something you're wondering about. Okay? Thanks for watching.